Hey everyone, Ariel Adams here with Spending Time, the aBlogtoWatch podcast. I have a special guest, Sujain Krishnan. Hey Sujain.
Hey, how's it going?
So this show is about discussing independent watch brands, new watch brands, what I call enthusiast-driven watch brands, and the Melbourne Watch Company, which is the company that Sujain started in Melbourne, Australia, is one of those brands, and they've been very difficult to classify. So the first part of this conversation, I want to chat with you on what type of brand you like to call yourself. There's micro brand, there's independent brand, there's small brand, niche brand. I'll tell you what I like, but just as the person who started the brand and obviously runs the brand, what terminology do you prefer?
Oh, that's a good question. I think micro brand is a term that's commonly used for smaller brands like us. But look, I prefer the term boutique brand. I think micro brand sort of has implications that it's me doing it all myself, which is I know is a lot of the case for a lot of these brands. But yeah, boutique brand, independent brand, that works for me. I mean, the label itself to me is not that important. I mean, we're not a big brand, of course, but look, I think any of those is fine.
And the brand started when? When did you begin the brand?
So I launched Melbourne Watch late 2013. So we'll be coming up on our 5-year mark fairly soon, which is pretty exciting.
Does it feel like a long time, or does it feel like it was just yesterday?
Oh, it feels like a long time, actually. Sometimes wonder, where's the time gone? Not to use too much of a pun there.
And you have a showroom now, and that's in Melbourne?
We do. So we launched the showroom at the end of 2016. So that was a big step up from our previous operations. It's been a huge amount of growth happening over the last 2 years, actually. So it's the showroom, but also the workshop there. So we have full-time watchmaking staff now, and we're doing the assembly in Australia.
You you appear to be doing well, and this is in a context of a watch industry where not everyone is doing well, and some people are doing great. Would you agree with that sentiment? Meaning, are you in a growth phase right now? Do you feel like you've made smart business decisions? I'm just sort of trying to get a little bit of context here for people to understand how a brand like yours, doing the type of business you do, feels that it's doing these days.
Look, to be honest, I think we're doing well. We're increasing our sales substantially year on year at the moment. As a measure of business growth, we've hired a lot of staff. I'll be hiring another watchmaker soon. We've got distributors internationally now as of this year. We're getting a lot of traffic through our showroom. Online sales are strong. So I think in comparison to maybe other brands in the industry, we're a bit different in terms of our market. 75% of our sales are actually within Australia still to this day. So I think we were also fortunate to have started at the right time.
75%, huh?
Yeah, 75% of our sales are within Australia.
When you say fortunate to start at the right time, explain that statement.
So look, we got our start in crowdfunding, which is very popular for brands to get their start still these days on Kickstarter, for example. But in 2013, it was a bit of a different environment. For starters, our first watch, the Flinders, was actually launched on Indiegogo, not Kickstarter, just simply because Kickstarter hadn't actually arrived in Australia yet.
Right.
And that year, I think there was maybe 4 watch projects, including ours, the entire year.
Mm-hmm.
And then 2014, that picked up a little bit, but there was still probably less than 10. We left crowdfunding the year after that, but these days I think there's 20 to 30 any given day, so there's a lot of competition now.
Right.
So I think it's a lot harder to stand out.
20 to 30 any given day. You mean there's like 20 to 30
watch
crowdfunding
projects.
watch projects
Yeah.
any given day? I hear you.
But
I hear
that
you.
may be a slight exaggeration, but if you go to Kickstarter, type in watches, you'll see a lot of projects. So there's a lot of competition, whereas we didn't have that as much back in 2013, 2014. And look, I'm often asked, do I think that we would be as successful if we launched today? And my honest answer is no, I don't think we would. I just think that there's there's so much competition these days that it's very, very difficult to stand out, especially with launching on Kickstarter these days. It's a different market. I mean, it's sort of, you have to offer huge discounts and all these added extras. And I think it would be hard for a brand to be successful and make enough money to grow.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a very interesting point. I mean, same thing with aBlogtoWatch. I've had questions about, if you had to do it all again, could you do it now? And I do think that when market conditions change, when things become oversaturated or interest changes, there's a certain degree of luck in what you do, but you also have to make a lot of the right decisions.
That's true.
How did you, decide? And again, this sort of conversation is going all over the place, because the point of this isn't just to talk about what you're doing at Melbourne Watch Company, but to talk about not only brands like Melbourne Watch Company, but people like you and what it sort of takes to get to this phase. Because I think that the point I want to make is that a brand like Melbourne Watch Company begins and thrives for one main reason, and that is being run by someone who's a watch enthusiast. That's not enough. You have to have other skills too. But if you were just a business guy and you were just interested in selling something and you're like, oh, there's an opening in watches, I feel like you're already kind of doomed at that point.
Yeah, actually, a good point. So to give you a bit of background on what I did before all this, so I was actually an IT consultant prior to starting Melbourne Watch Company. I've been working in the industry, mainly in the financial services sector for, I think it was 6 or 7 years. So I was actually doing quite well. But I don't know, I just sort of felt, look, can I be doing something else with my life? And watches were a relatively new hobby for me, actually, maybe the last sort of 3 years before that. I first got into it through forums such as What You Seek. So I spent a lot of time on there learning about really affordable mechanical watches. My budget wasn't that big for purchases, so I was buying a lot of sort of sort of $200 to $300 Australian dollars. So I guess that's even less US dollars. Pieces, things like Seiko's, Orient's, reliable, affordable watches that were well reviewed by the community.
Right.
And then I started to become more interested in how the watches themselves worked. So I actually, prior to Melbourne Watch Company, for about a year, I ran a hobby business just from home which I'd called Melbourne Custom Watches. And what I was doing was I was actually buying parts for Pilot Homage style watches from various online sellers, putting them together myself, sandblasting the cases in my backyard, selling them on eBay and on the forums, just as a hobby, just to learn a bit more about watches themselves. I wasn't making any money, and I was driving my wife crazy with all the tools lying around our home. So I was putting it together myself, and just as a bit of a hobby business. And I think that's what spurred me into thinking, well, there could be something here actually, but it would need to be a proper brand with my own designs. And it was through some contacts I made on the forums that I was introduced to some manufacturers, etc. And then I think it was September or maybe August 2013. Got back from a holiday in Europe actually with my wife, and I literally quit my job the next day and said, look, I'm going to give this a go for 12 months, and if it doesn't work out, then I'll go back to IT after that. But I put a bit of planning into it and a bit of investment.
That's a risky move. That's a risky move.
Yeah, people. When I just happened to be between contracts at work, and when I came back and quit, they just said, "Have you lost your mind?" Particularly as none of them really knew I was into watches, so it just seemed really out of left field.
You could have been in a lot of stuff. Why did you quit your job for watches as opposed to something? What is it about this hobby? I mean, look, you're an intelligent person. You come from IT. You know more than anyone else that this is an unreasonable desire. Maybe not illogical. It's not unreasonable. It's an illogical desire.
It was illogical. Look, it just I thought. Like I said, there was a bit of a plan. It wasn't just pure insanity. I looked at the market here in Australia, and I thought, if I focused mainly on trying to build the business here locally first, Australia is a bit different to the US, I guess, in that our watch market is very, very limited. There's not a lot of choice. There are, at the time in 2013, there were basically no brands, maybe one or two brands, and you go into your watch stores in the city or department stores, and you either have the lower end fashion watches, so your Fossil Group type things, or you have your entry level Swiss watches, so things like your Tags, Longines, even Victorinox, I guess. But there was a big gap there in terms of the price point. So in terms of Australian dollars, that was sort of $300, up to 300 for the entry level fashion stuff, and then from around $1,000 for the entry level Swiss stuff here. So and we're talking about sort of quartz Swiss as well. So and I thought, look, well, there could be an opportunity here to introduce, I guess, more affordable mechanical style watches into the market and see how that goes. And it turned out that I was right. There was that demand. So I say there still is, because we're still going. But yeah, so from there, I focused on building the brand itself, I suppose, but also the e-commerce side of things, the technical business side of things, which I think some brands ignore, especially when they're starting out. Because most of our sales up until we had the showroom, and actually still these days, I'd say 90% of our sales are still direct through our website. And as you grow and as you hire and take office space, etc., you need to make a certain amount of sales every single month to keep that going. And
right.
It's not just a matter of advertising on websites and posting on Facebook, etc. There's a lot of behind the scenes marketing, I guess, technical stuff that needs to go on. And I spent a lot of time learning about that. It's more the e-commerce side of things from a pure business perspective rather than the watch. Sorry, I'm probably rambling a little bit now, but it's like I'm often asked, look, what's any advice to people starting out? And I say, look, think about it that we're selling a product in the fashion retail industry. Ultimately, it doesn't matter whether it's a watch or whether it's a bag or shoes. There's still certain things that you need to do to get new customers in the door, because whilst I love the watch enthusiast community, it is still a limited market, and I think it's also our job to expand and get new customers interested in watches, and discovering our brand. And eventually, I know that they'll move up to more expensive brands, but it's sort of like, well, getting more customers into the market is good for everybody.
So you kind of gloss over a couple things that I think are really, really important. And you talk about market research. You talk about openings that you found, like price openings. You talk about a lot of things that I think are really important about creating a company and creating the justification to do this. Do you find that a lot of people maybe misunderstand that? They spend a little bit too much time getting excited about the design, that they're going to sell something, that there's an ego involved with it. Tell me, just from your perspective, some of the biggest mistakes or things that people underestimate or things related to that when they're trying to start up a brand like yours, I guess, as a competitor.
Yeah, look, good questions. And look, I actually do speak with a lot of other brand owners. There's actually quite a few of us that keep in touch on a regular basis. Even though we're technically competitors, we do share information with each other, and that is beneficial. And look, I think that you're right. It's there are people that are too focused on, I guess, the fact that it's a watch, and they get really excited about the design and all that, but they don't realize that it's actually quite difficult to market that watch. But you have to spend money on marketing as well, and that there is a lot of competition. It's like, what is your unique selling point? And why is somebody going to give you their money as a new brand, or even us coming up to 5 years? We're still a relatively new brand, so that's a question that we still have to ask ourselves every day. Why is somebody going to come onto my website and buy this watch? That's as opposed to going and buying a very established brand, which they can get for the same money, if not less, most of the time. And I think people often can't answer that properly. And that can be the difference between success and failure. I don't think that enough people starting out think about what they're going to be doing 2 to 3 years down the track, like how they're going to get there. I see a lot of new brands. And this is similar feedback that I get from my other brand owner friends that have been around as long as I have. We look at new brands and we think, look, they're really excited. They are offering a really good product, but it's too cheap. They're not going to make enough money to actually be able to survive. In terms of Kickstarter, for example, there's a lot of stuff on there which seems to be getting cheaper and cheaper, and it becomes like a race to the bottom in terms of specs versus price. But then you'll find that, well, okay, you've done your first Kickstarter project for that model. You can't do that project. You can't offer that same watch again on Kickstarter. So if you want to reorder it if it was a hit, how are you going to do that? You have to use your own money. So a lot of brands on Kickstarter tend to become a series of projects rather than a cohesive brand with a core offering, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, look, here's the thing. You and I know how challenging this is. And I'm really glad that you're saying these things, because so often I see people that think this is easy, or I guess I'll say it this way. They always see the grass as being greener from the outside. They're like, oh, they're making so much money. Oh, they're just doing these 3 steps. Oh, it's as simple as this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I wish it was that simple.
And I'm not trying to scare people out of watch industry entrepreneurialism. I'm really not. And again, in all businesses, what is the statistics? 80% fail, 20% live. What you do, which I think is the most respectable thing for any business person, is you have a genuine long-term outlook. And then even in the established watch industry, you don't have that. You know, it takes for a larger watch brand 5 to 6 years to come out with an entire new collection. I'm talking about, new case and things like that. The average lifespan of a CEO is less than that. So managers who are at the brands aren't even at the brand a lot of the time long enough to come out with an entirely new collection. And so it's true. The lack of long-term vision, which in my opinion, and again, I mean, this translates to other industries as well, but especially in today's watch industry, that kills you. Of course, the detail is important, but if you don't look at it as a long-term thing, I mean, I think that 5 years in, you've already beaten the curve. 10 years in, we've beaten the curve. So I guess you and I have some authority to talk about long-term vision. But that's really there's no get-rich-quick in watches. There just isn't.
No, I don't think so. And look, I'd be lying if I said that we haven't made mistakes along the way. A couple of years ago, things were quite different, actually. So in 2016, it was still mainly myself doing everything. I did have one guy helping me, but the product was completely made offshore. We were going in a bit of a different direction in terms of our marketing, etc. And we tried to get into retail. So we were at the Hong Kong Watch and Clock Show with our partners there, and it actually went quite badly. We invested quite a lot of money in that, and we didn't get any interest, or at least nothing that we could follow through on. And it was at that moment I thought, well, okay, now we may be in trouble. So, like, what do I do about it? And at that moment I said,
so what kind of trouble exactly?
Oh, look, I just thought, look, well, I don't think we're going to hit our targets for growth. I don't see the brand going to that next level that I wanted it to get to unless we really shook things up, changed direction. So what I decided to do was to go out and seek a bit more investment in terms of capital to really change the direction of where we were heading and go, okay, well, why weren't they interested? Why weren't retailers and distributors interested? And their main feedback at the time was, well, your brand, you've got some nice designs, but what is your unique selling point? Like, you're not actually made in Australia. Why is somebody in our market going to buy your product over another brand? What's your story? So I said, well, okay, we need to work on that. So I decided to open the showroom instead and have that physical presence, and then in turn open the workshop so that we can actually say, all right, well, now we're actually doing things in Australia. So therefore we have a bit more legitimacy in terms of calling ourselves Melbourne Watch Company, apart from just being a name. And that really helped.
So you said okay. So that's very, very interesting what you're talking about. I don't want to gloss over this, but you said at some point you said you sought capital. Does that mean you took investor money, you took a loan to grow at a certain pace?
Yeah. So in 2015, so going back a little bit further, I decided that I wanted to step away from Kickstarter as a funding mechanism, because I thought to myself, look, we need to be able to stand on our own 2 feet and have a core range of watches which are always available, rather than, as I said before, a series of projects. So in order to do that, I needed to go out and get money, because even with making money, quite a bit of money off Kickstarter, there's never enough to really expand, plus reorder, plus hire, and et cetera, et cetera. So you do need some capital behind you to make things happen. So I was able to get some investment from partners and the bank. So we've been quite fortunate in terms of bank finance here, actually, which is my preferred option. Fast forward to when I wanted to open the showroom. I mean, look, I'm not going to lie, it cost a lot of money to set up the showroom. These kind of things, like people look at our space now, they go, wow, this is amazing. You guys are doing well. It's like, yeah, but we had to invest in that, and it was a risk. Well, before opening the showroom, I had no idea whether we would get enough people coming through the showroom to make it worthwhile. Because it's going from a pure online brand to now having a physical space, but it's also not really a shop. It's sort of people come by appointment. So it's sort of like what Christopher Ward do in London. And to be honest, like that looking at what they did was an inspiration for me. And look, we were lucky that it worked out. We get a lot of people coming through the showroom each week, and it sort of pays for itself.
So you're at the Watch and Clock Fair, the Hong Kong Watch and Clock Fair, and you mentioned that there was a crisis of sorts.
I wouldn't say a crisis. I mean, look, it was not the result we were hoping for. We had some interest, which was not quite enough, I guess, if that makes any sense. But most people that came and met with me and looked at the product, looked at our catalog and the brand story, they said, look, we like it, but it's not going to work in a retail environment yet. You need to do something unique. Like, well, what is your unique selling point? That was one of the key bits of feedback that I got. Why would one of our customers in our market, say in the US or the UK or Europe, why would they buy your watch over one of our other brands? Mm-hmm. And that's a good question, and I didn't have a good answer for that.
It is a good question.
And I thought, I said to myself afterwards, look, if I couldn't answer that, then something's wrong. How are we going to get to that next level if I don't step back and take a fundamental look at what we're doing? And that's when, like I said, when I thought, well, okay, we need to actually do something that makes us worthy of carrying the name Melbourne Watch Company. I mean, like, we have to do things in Melbourne. Otherwise, it's just a name. It's there's no unique selling point there.
So what was that thing? What made the Melbourne Watch Company actually a watch company in Melbourne when you made that change? What was that thing? Because let's just put some context in it. You're in Melbourne. You like watches. It makes sense that you call the Melbourne Watch Company. I guess fortunate for you that name wasn't taken.
Yeah.
You do what's available to you. Is you try to go to manufacturing where it's available, and that is mostly in Asia. Swiss manufacturing is available, but it's not just challenging from a financial perspective, but it's challenging just to get the product you want. It's just not as available. The services aren't set up in as straightforward a way. And then you realize that there's a problem. The brand or the product quality that you thought you'd have may not be there. The distribution and the sales strategy that you planned might not be working. And it sounds like you had to, I don't want to say go back to the drawing board, but you had to reframe and remake your brand in a way that in a sense could fundamentally change what you're doing, but it also needed to look kind of transparent, or at least, not transparent. It needed to transparently kind of happen while you're doing business and while you're still trying to satisfy your customers.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of our core business at the time, like I said, it was still mainly in Australia, and I don't think the people that were already buying really cared about the fact that we were made overseas, etc. So we were still getting enough business consistently to be okay. But like I said, I had a goal for where I wanted to get to over the next 12 months, and I didn't think we were going to hit that unless we, really looked at what we were doing. So in terms of what we did, so the showroom, look, the reasoning behind that was twofold. Like we were getting a lot of inquiries locally from people saying, oh, well, I really like your stuff. Where can I actually try it on? And we had a tiny service office room, basically, in the suburbs here. And, people coming there and meeting us, it looked a bit, I mean, people would still buy stuff, but it wasn't very glamorous, I guess, for lack of a better word. And, if a brand that's growing, I think they need a nice space. People I guess maybe not as much watch enthusiasts, but the general public who are buying something that they don't really know much about watches. They want to see a nice space and feel like the product they're buying is, I don't know, there's a bit of prestige to it. So we figured, okay, look, you know what, we need to be in the city for starters, or near enough to the city that it's accessible for people. And it needs to look cool. So sunk a bit of money into that. I got a professional designer to lay it out, and we found a nice spot that's a little bit out of the city centre, but still very accessible. It's not a shop, as in like people can just walk in off the street. It's on the third floor of our building, so people will have to make an appointment. So really, when people come, they're already interested, which is good. So right. I think 95% of the people that come through the showroom buy something or more than one thing, which is great.
So let's talk about the Australian watch market. You said that you still sell most of your watches in Australia. You obviously have lived in Australia long enough to know what it's like. How would you say Australia is a different watch market than Europe or Asia or the United States?
I'd say primarily there's less choice in terms of brands. That is changing over the last couple of years. I mean, with us and other brands in that sort of boutique space. But even in terms of the major brands, there's very little presence. I mean, it's just, I guess, a factor of population. In the end, like we have a much smaller population than elsewhere. There's a lot less advertising in public spaces for watches, less than I've noticed, say, traveling around Asia and the US, even the UK. And I think that it's part of all that might be just the fact that we're a little bit isolated in a way. Like we don't have the same access to things locally, and people have to buy from overseas for a lot of stuff to get a wider range of choice. And I think, just as a factor of population, there's a far smaller, very, very, very small watch enthusiast community here. Based on all my experience so far, forums, reading, connecting with bloggers, etc. They're all mainly in the US or the UK. There's very, very few here in Australia. So most of our customers here are not watch enthusiasts. They are people that are, they usually own a watch, but it's usually a sort of a fashion quartz watch, and they're looking to step up. Or maybe they don't know that they want to step up, but they once learning about us, they think, I wouldn't mind a nicer watch. Let's go find out more about it. It's sort of, an interesting combination of factors, but it's, I think the other thing that's been really good for us is just that home court advantage. People here, they do like to support local businesses, even if they're not making the products here. I think Australia's never had a watchmaking industry. That's the other thing. We've never had much in the way of even watchmakers, really. It's been very, very interesting in that regards. The manufacturing industry here has basically collapsed. So people, I think people's expectations are a bit different, if that makes sense.
Right. No, that's interesting. So you told me that recently you started making watches in Australia or assembling, and that you can now call yourself a Made in Australia watch. Did I say that correctly?
So actually last week, we haven't actually announced it properly yet, but I guess this may well be part of it. It's similar to, I guess, the FHS and various organisations in different countries. Australia has one that certifies businesses as being Australian made. So it's actually a trademark, a registered trademark, Australian made, those two words, or made in Australia, plus a logo. You may have seen it somewhere. It's like a little green triangle with a kangaroo in it. It's on Australian exported products. It's very, very well known here and in Asia. So we applied for that, and we were accepted finally last week, which was good.
Congrats.
So I mean, look, I guess the premise was that we add enough value here in Australia, and the final transformation of the product occurs in Australia. Therefore, it qualifies as being Australian made now. So it's just a logo, a label, but it will help us in our export market.
Well, I think it's very important because, again, the discussion here is evolving, right? And I think that part of having a long-term vision, as we've discussed, is making your brand better and better and better, and being more what you originally say you want to be. A lot of brands, and I'm sure you see this all the time, they have these like mission statements. We are intended to be this. We value this. But then they just make a brand and that's it. If you value something, you keep trying to do it. Like, you obviously value watches in your own particular special way. And whatever that way is, that those values should be articulated in your products as much as possible. And I have definitely seen that over time, your watches have gotten better and better. You have, of course, classic taste. And I think that it's also important now to talk about how important design and aesthetics have been to where the brand are right now. And I want to ask you, the look and feel of the watch. I'll just say the design, not even the construction. That's a
Sure.
different conversation. How important do you feel that your designs are to your success?
Well, look, that's a good question as well. I I'd say that when we got started, I made the conscious decision that we wanted to do, I guess, more classically styled or more dress style watches, because I saw in the micro brand, boutique brand space at the time that most brands tended to be doing divers or sportier style watches. So I thought, well, okay, well, there's probably a bit of a gap in the market there as well. So I think that helped at first, that we were one of the few, I guess, new brands that were doing more classically style or more dress style pieces. And it was also just personal taste. I've always been more interested in those style watches. I've never been a big diver guy. Or pilot watch guy, apart from the ones I was making and selling myself. I didn't even really wear them myself. But there's, I think, in terms of the general public here as well, we got a quick bit of market research from myself sort of revealed that people prefer sort of more classically styled watches here for whatever reason, as opposed to say, just as an example, in Asia, for example, Hong Kong, Singapore, I find that people tend to prefer sort of bigger, sportier style watches, or they love divers. I could be wrong there. Once again, that's just my my own personal observation.
No,
But
this is important because there's no hard or fast science to this. But your observations they mean something, and they do influence your business decisions.
yeah, so and from there, look, I guess I was just designing things that I liked, based on I guess the classic styles, like deck watches, your sort of more traditional, sort of business casual type watches. And I was just sort of putting a little bit of a modern spin on it. We tried to do some unique things. I mean, the Portier, for example, that collection, which is still our bestseller since 2014, we just through, I guess, some trial and error, we ended up with a molded ceramic dial, as opposed to, most of them have enamel dials, which is sort of painted on. But it's actually a thick molded one-piece dial there. And that took a bit of trial and error to get right, actually. But yeah, and from there, it's just evolving the other collections so that there's some sort of, I guess, brand DNA between them. And also keeping in mind that, I guess, like a lot of new brands like us, we are limited by what movements we have access to. So that does influence what we can come up with in terms of design as well. Particularly as we've tried to focus on automatic watches as well. And I guess the choice of movements available to us at our price point is not huge.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions that you sometimes find customers have about the brand that you need to clear up and might want to globally clear up here? And then at the same time, what type of misconceptions do you find that people in the industry have had that you also want to clear up a little bit? And maybe it's not just about Melbourne Watch Company, but it's about other enthusiast-driven, smaller watch brands.
Oh, that's a bit of an interesting one there. Look, I think one of the things that we've been fighting against for some time is this perception that, look, you put X movement in a watch, therefore it should only cost this much. That the price that the brand is selling the watch for should be a direct function of the specs. I don't think that's true at all. I think that that really ignores all the other factors involved, such as the costs that the brand has to run and provide good service and after-sales support, warranty, the design. Things don't just materialize out of nothing. There's a lot of time and effort and therefore money that goes into producing a design and prototyping and perfecting, marketing as well. That's one thing I really hate to see is when people are like, oh, well, nice watch, but it's too expensive for, this movement. I can get the same movement in this other brand for X dollars. that's one of the things that really annoys me. And also, I don't know what it really annoys a lot of other boutique brand owners.
Yeah. So let's explain what that is. So this is when someone is buying a watch, kind of like they're buying a spec tool, where it's like, well, I can get the same tool with this metal and this kind of shape, and it's, it says it does this many times a day, and you're right. It would be like if you compared cars just based upon the technical specs. Like, it tells you something, but it doesn't really tell you everything. Not even at all.
Yeah, and I think that they don't realize that this is perhaps more of an enthusiast thing. Sometimes I know that while good intention, they tend to get carried away sometimes in terms of specs versus price, while ignoring the emotional aspect of the purchase. Because, like I said, a lot of the guys that buy our watches are not enthusiasts. They've got no idea about watches, but they're buying them because they like the look, they like the feel, they like the brand as well. That there is value in the brand. And I think that people forget that as well, that building the brand will add value to your product. For example, when we first started, we were selling watches for, 450 Australian, 500 max, which is like, I don't know, 350 to 400 US. Now, those same sort of automatic watches we're selling comfortably closer to the 1,000 Aussie mark. And why? Because, we've built the brand, people trust us. There's an element of how much will you pay versus how much do you trust the brand as well.
Let me defend this for a second here, because I agree with you, but let's back up for a second. One, sometimes a brand is charging too much for branding, right? Like, you can get a really good steel sports watch and it doesn't have to cost you $30,000, right? Like, you can get a great price. So branding isn't everything. And on the other side, there are fantastic watches that, like, you and only you know as a watch nerd. And you take it around and you strut it, and you're like, people are like, oh, what's that? And they have no idea. And you're like, oh, you should know how awesome this is. Rolex doesn't really need to do that. Rolex has been doing branding for so many years that a person in the general public doesn't need to be told that's something to be impressed with. They might not know all the ins and outs, and they probably don't even know a small percentage of the ins and outs. But the brand has sort of spoken for itself.
Oh, yeah, of course.
But you agree that there needs to be the right mix between a fair price, but also a brand that invests in the brand.
Yeah, and look, by that argument as well, like, I'll completely admit that, and I think this is the same for any brand that's at my level or in terms of age or exposure, is that, look, no one's going to be walking around with one of our watches in the general public and someone's going to spot it and go, oh, look, I recognize that. Probably not. It's that, there is that balance. And it's not also by saying that we're now selling our watches for a lot more than we originally started with. There's actually been a lot of evolution in the watches as well. I mean, like, in terms of movements and finishing and everything from straps to packaging to, warranty length, etc. So it's not like we've just doubled our pricing. There's a lot involved there. Plus, that they're actually being assembled here locally now. That adds cost as well. So, but I think we're at the point where we've found that sort of price point now, which people seem to be, they're okay with paying that. And we're also making enough out of that we can survive and grow. That's very important as well. So, it's we've often seen people say, oh, well, 75% of what Rolex charges is their marketing costs. That's not true as well.
That's not true. A lot That's not true.
Yeah. So there's
reassured meal, maybe true.
So yeah, look, it's a balance, and I think each brand needs to find that, and it also depends on the brand's goals. I mean, like, I just wanted to be able to hire staff here, create some jobs as well, and like, I'm very proud of the fact that I'm now employing people in an industry which doesn't really exist here in Australia. So, like, that may sound arrogant to some people. That's fine, but it's like I'm happy that I've done something that's not just making money. So, and to be honest, we probably would be making more money if everything was still built overseas, but we wouldn't have grown as a brand, if that makes sense.
I understand. That makes sense. So tell me a little bit about, and we sort of want to wrap this call up with the notion of what do you want to do next, and what are your brand aspirations? Like, what I'm not saying like name a brand that you aspire to be like, but how big do you want to get? Is there a specific type of product that if you made it, you're like, I'm done? Is there a specific type of participation in the community that you're interested in? Like, what are the aspirations you have?
Yeah, so look, what we're actively doing now is, I guess, enhancing our range. So we're trying to shift more towards using Swiss movements where possible, but customizing them a bit. So, look, things like, we're bringing out an automatic moon phase later in the year, and little touches like we'll be adding the Australian Southern Cross constellation as the moon phase disc rather than the standard thing. In terms of product development and growing the brand, I really want to start making more parts here in Australia. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity for that here in Australia in terms of, since the auto industry is sort of packing up and leaving those manufacturing style jobs, there's plenty of people out there that I think could be well suited to doing things like making cases, etc. Eventually, we'd like to look at being able to do our own movements here, but that's a huge amount of investment there, and probably
It is
more of a 5 to 10 year goal. But it's still good to have those goals, I think, and we're sort of taking small steps towards there. So, in terms of growth and size, look, to be honest, I don't really want to become a massive brand. Where I want it to be at the point where we're comfortable and able to manage our operations successfully. I don't want to grow to the point where our quality suffers or our service suffers. Look, we will look at currently this year we're expanding into, I guess, retail through partners. There is a little bit of discussion around maybe another retail space here in Melbourne. But yeah, just controlled growth has always been my goal.
Last thoughts for customers, potential customers. Why Melbourne Watch Company? What do they need to know about you? And maybe there's a thank you or a message that you want to send out to the community about how what they have done has helped, inspired, frustrated, or changed your own perceptions of what it means to be a watch lover.
Yeah, look, actually, we'll start with the thank you, I suppose. I wouldn't have done any of this if it wasn't for the support that I received through the community in places like What You See, predominantly back when I got started. That's just a fact. Other brand owners as well. Actually, I'll give a shout out to Chris Vale, who runs Lewin Huey and NTH. He actually gave me a lot of help when I first got started, pointed me in the right direction, and pleased to say that we still keep in touch quite often to date.
An interesting character.
Yeah, an interesting character. He's a good guy. So, I know he ruffles some people the wrong way. But
I agree with you. I like it, but just some of the times, he'll come up in comments. I'm like, what? Where is this guy even coming up in comments? People.
He's very passionate.
Yeah.
But he's given me an incredible amount of help and support over the years, particularly when things weren't so. Like I said, when I had a bit of a crisis of faith a couple of years ago, he was actually quite helpful with that, and just having someone to bounce things off. So, big thank you to him. Yeah, look, in terms of other people, look, I mean, ultimately, family and friends have been, critical to. I mean, if you don't have the support, I think at home, for me to quit my job and be able to do this full time, like I said, some people said there was insanity, but my wife didn't even bat an eyelid at that. So it's my family just said, look, if you think you have to do it, just do it. So what I would say to anyone that's aspiring is that if you think you can do it and you've got a plan together, then do it. I mean, I honestly say life's too short. It's give it a go. I think I probably got off on a bit of a tangent there from the original question, but yeah, it's. I
ask hard
about
questions.
The brand.
I'm known to.
Yeah, what people should know about the brand. Look, we're. I'd say that we're offering a good product at a good price. That's been my ultimate goal, and I think we've still maintained that. If you buy from us, you will, we will give you the best service we can possibly give. That's, I never argue with customers in terms of if they think something's wrong with their watch, something's wrong with it. We're not going to say, look, that's, you're not doing things right. It's, I want people to be happy. I think we've built up a good reputation in terms of that. And nothing makes me happy when I get, repeat business from somebody and they're like, oh, just love what you're doing, and getting just random emails from customers saying, look, I saw a post on Facebook, whatever, and I just wanted to reach out and say that really love what you're doing. And it's those little moments which you go, yeah, it makes it worthwhile.
Perfect,
So
perfect.
Bit sappy there, but yeah.
No. Everyone, the man behind Melbourne Watch Company, Sujain Krishnan. Thank you so much, Sujain. This has been a very interesting conversation. I hope everyone has learned a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes at these enthusiast created watch brands, some of the complexities that there are some things that are very, very hard, and there's some things that are even harder. It is not an easy time to get into watches, even though there are arguably more resources available to do so than ever before. But if done correctly, there's a lot of satisfaction, and there's a lot of growth and places you can go. So thank you, Sujain, so much.
Yeah, actually, just one more thing.
Please.
If anyone has any questions, feel free to send us an email through the website. Particularly, if there's any aspiring entrepreneurs out there who just want to bounce some ideas off me, I'm more than happy to get back to you.
Well, there you go. Free advice from the man himself. All right. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you.